I didn't realize I was disappearing until I heard myself apologize for needing my own life. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. My name is Eleanor. I was 69 years old when my family decided I needed help I never asked for. They never raised their voices. They never used harsh words. That's how they got away with it for so long. I had lived alone for 7 years after my husband passed. Not lonely, alone. There is a difference, and I knew it well. I managed my home. I paid my bills on time. I drove myself where I needed to go. I wasn't extraordinary. I was capable. But capability, I learned, makes people impatient when it belongs to someone they expect to slow down. It started with small things. My daughter, Susan, began calling more often. At first, I was grateful. She asked how I was feeling. Then she asked what I had eaten. Then she asked whether I was tired. Eventually, she asked if I was sure I should still be handling things myself. My son, Daniel, lived farther away. He joined conversations late and spoke carefully, like someone reading from a script. "You know we just worry about you," he said. Worry is a convincing word. I believed them. That was my first mistake. The second came quietly. Susan offered to organize my finances. "Just to help," she said. I declined politely. She smiled and said, "We'll talk about it later." Later arrived faster than I expected. One afternoon, Susan came over with a folder, color-coded, tabs labeled in neat handwriting. She laid it on my kitchen table like a gift. "I've already started," she said. I felt a strange tightening in my chest, not fear, recognition. I thanked her and told her I would look at it. She didn't leave it with me. She took it back with her. That should have concerned me, but years of being agreeable had trained me to ignore my instincts. Daniel called the next day. He asked whether I had considered giving Susan power of attorney. "Just in case," he said. "Just in case" is another dangerous phrase. I laughed it off. "I'm fine," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then he replied, "We know, we just want things to be easier." Easier for whom? I didn't ask. I wish I had. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Appointments were scheduled without my input. Information was shared before I consented. Susan began speaking to me slowly, carefully, as if I were already halfway gone. I noticed how often I started sentences with apologies. "I'm sorry, I just thought," "I'm sorry, maybe I'm wrong." I wasn't wrong. I was being replaced. The moment it became clear happened at a family dinner. Susan and Daniel sat across from me, exchanging glances. Susan cleared her throat. "We think it might be time to consider some changes," she said. I waited. Daniel nodded. "Living arrangements, financial oversight, support." Support, another word that sounds kind until it isn't. I asked them a question. "When did you decide this?" Susan answered too quickly. "We've been talking for a while." Talking. Without me. I felt something settle in my bones. Not anger. Resolve. "I didn't ask for this," I said quietly. Susan looked hurt. Daniel looked frustrated. That's the problem. You never ask for help. Help. They used that word like a shield. I stood up and cleared the table. The conversation ended without resolution. But something else ended too. My silence. That night I sat alone and replayed everything. Not their words, my reactions. How often I had deferred. How quickly I had doubted myself. I realized something painful. I had mistaken love for compliance. I decided then that I would not disappear politely. The next morning I called a lawyer, not to accuse, to understand. That call changed the direction of my life. The lawyer listened without interruption, then asked a question no one else had asked me. "What do you want?" The simplicity stunned me. I had been so busy responding that I hadn't considered choosing. "I want to stay myself," I said. He nodded. "Then we should act now," he replied. I didn't tell my children, not yet. I wanted to see what would happen when I stopped cooperating. That answer came quickly. Susan noticed the change. Daniel did too. Their concern sharpened into impatience. And impatience, I would soon learn, reveals more than kindness ever does. Susan noticed first. It was subtle at the beginning, the way these things always are. I stopped explaining myself, stopped filling silence with reassurance. When she suggested changes, I listened, but I didn't agree. That unsettled her. People who are used to compliance feel threatened by calm resistance. She called more often. Then she started showing up without warning. "I was in the neighborhood," she would say. She never was. She looked around my house differently now, not as a guest, as someone evaluating space. She commented on things she had never noticed before. The stairs, the cabinets, the clutter she imagined but didn't exist. "You don't really need all this, do you?" she asked one afternoon. I smiled politely. "I do," I said. She laughed as if I were joking. That laughter stayed with me long after she left. Daniel followed her lead. He began sending articles, links about aging, stories framed as concern. "You should read this," he said. "It reminded me of you." I've read them all. They weren't about help. They were about preparation. Preparation for a version of me they had already accepted. One evening, Susan sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same one where my husband and I had once planned vacations and paid bills side by side. She folded her hands. "Mom," she said gently, "have you thought about what would happen if something went wrong?" I looked at her. "Something always goes wrong," I replied. "That's life." She sighed. "That's not what I mean." "I know," I said. She leaned forward. "We just want to be ready." Ready. That word again. "Ready for what?" I asked. She hesitated. "For when you can't do this anymore." There it was. Not illness, not accident, assumption. I stood up and began clearing the table. "I'm still doing it," I said calmly. She watched me, confusion flickering across her face. "You don't have to prove anything," she said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm living." She didn't understand the difference. A week later, Daniel called and told me Susan had contacted a financial planner on my behalf. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, because I was finally paying attention. The next morning, I met with the lawyer again. He reviewed everything carefully. Then he said something that stayed with me. "Loss of independence rarely happens all at once," he said. "It happens in small permissions." I knew exactly what he meant. Each time I stayed quiet, each time I agreed to just talk, each time I apologized for standing my ground, those were permissions. I revoked them. I updated documents, restricted access, created clear boundaries where none had existed. Not aggressively, quietly. Susan noticed the shift immediately. Her concern sharpened into frustration. "You're pushing us away," she said during one tense call. "No," I replied. "I'm standing still." Daniel accused me of being influenced. Susan accused me of being stubborn. Neither asked what I wanted anymore. They spoke about me, not with me. That was the moment I understood something painful. Their fear wasn't about my safety. It was about losing control. One afternoon, Susan showed up again, this time with papers. She slid them across the table. "Just sign these so we can help properly," she said. I didn't look at them. I pushed them back. "I'm not signing anything." Her voice rose. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I met her eyes. "For whom?" She stood up abruptly. "You're acting like we're the enemy." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You're acting like I'm already gone." She left without another word. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was honest. I sat alone that evening and felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, relief. I had stopped negotiating my existence, and once you do that, people either adjust or reveal themselves. I didn't know which my family would choose yet, but I knew what I would no longer choose. I would not disappear quietly, not for love, not for peace, not for anyone. Susan didn't speak to me for days after that. At first, I thought she was simply angry, but anger, I learned, passes quickly when it doesn't get the reaction it expects. What followed was something else. Concern, performed. Daniel called one evening, his voice unusually gentle. "Mom," he said, "Susan's really worried about you." I didn't respond right away. I had spent years responding quickly, smoothing tension before it could grow. This time, I let silence do the work. "Worried about what?" I finally asked. He cleared his throat. "She feels like you're shutting us out, that you're not being yourself." I smiled softly. "I'm being more myself than I've been in years," I said. He sighed. "That's not how it looks from the outside." From the outside. That phrase stayed with me long after we hung up, because it revealed something important. They were watching me, not listening to me. A few days later, Susan came back. This time she brought Daniel with her. They sat across from me on the couch, close together, as if proximity might create authority. Susan spoke first. "We think it would help if you saw a doctor," she said. "I already do," I replied. "A specialist," Daniel added, "just to be sure." I nodded slowly. "To be sure of what?" They exchanged a glance. Susan answered carefully, "That you're thinking clearly." There it was, not worry about my health, doubt about my mind. I felt a quiet anger rise, not sharp, not explosive, but steady, the kind that comes when something sacred is being questioned. "I am thinking clearly," I said. "That's the problem." Susan leaned forward. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "I have." She shook her head. "You used to trust us." I met her gaze. "I used to ignore myself." The room fell quiet. Daniel tried to soften it. "No one is accusing you of anything," he said. I stood up. "You just did," I replied. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. That mattered. When I returned, Susan was crying. Real tears this time. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. I sat down across from her. "I'm not doing this to you," I said gently. "I'm doing this for me." She wiped her eyes. "We're your family." "Yes," I said, "and that's why this hurts." Daniel looked at me, frustration visible now. "So what happens next?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "Next," I said, "we stop pretending this is about help." They waited. "This is about control, and I won't give it." Susan stood up abruptly. "If you won't let us help, then we may have to take other steps." I looked at her calmly. "You're free to do what you think is right, so am I." They left shortly after that. This time I didn't feel shaken. I felt resolved. That night I reviewed everything again. Documents, boundaries, plans. I made one more decision. I invited a neutral third party into my life, not to take over, but to observe. A social worker, a patient advocate, someone trained to see what families often refuse to see. The meeting was respectful. She asked questions, observed interactions, reviewed my daily routines. At the end, she smiled. "You're doing very well," she said, "and you're very clear about what you want." I asked her something that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. "Why do families do this? Why do they stop seeing us? She thought for a moment. Because independence in an older parent forces adult children to confront their own discomfort. Control feels easier than acceptance. That answer settled something inside me. The next confrontation came in writing, a formal letter. Susan and Daniel were requesting a mental capacity evaluation. Again, this time more forcefully. I wasn't surprised. I forwarded it to my lawyer and the advocate. We responded calmly, firmly, with evidence. The evaluation happened. Again, I passed. Again. This time the report was detailed, unambiguous. Susan didn't call afterward. Daniel sent a single message. I didn't think it would come to this. Neither did I, but now that it had, I wasn't afraid. I had crossed a threshold. Once you stop needing permission to exist, everything changed. I no longer waited for approval. I no longer explained my choices. I lived, and that terrified them more than any mistake ever could. I had expected anger. What I didn't expect was strategy. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, slipped through the mail slot like any other piece of paper. No warning, no call, just an envelope with my name typed neatly on the front. Inside were words I never thought I would read about myself. In the interest of safety, concerns regarding decision-making, temporary intervention. Susan and Daniel were requesting guardianship. Not full, not permanent, just enough. Enough to make decisions for me until things stabilized. I sat at the table and read the letter twice, then a third time. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. What I felt was something far colder. Betrayal that had finally stopped pretending to be love. I called my lawyer immediately. He listened carefully, then spoke with a calm I had come to appreciate. "This is serious," he said, "but it's not uncommon and it's not automatic." I asked him the question that mattered most. "Do they have a case?" There was a pause. "No," he said, "not unless the court believes you're unable to care for yourself." "Do you?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "No." That was enough. We prepared. Medical records, financial history, independent evaluations, statements from neighbors, friends, professionals. I wasn't building a defense. I was documenting a life. Susan called that evening. Her voice was controlled, almost rehearsed. "We didn't want it to come to this," she said. I let the silence stretch. "You chose this," I replied quietly. "We're doing what's best," she insisted. "For whom?" I asked. She exhaled sharply. "You're making us look like villains." I closed my eyes. "You did that yourselves," I said. She hung up. The hearing was scheduled quickly, faster than I expected. In the days leading up to it, I felt something unexpected. Strength. Not the loud kind, the steady kind, the kind that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, not to impress, to feel like myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had endured, and who was still here. In the courtroom, Susan avoided my eyes. Daniel looked tired. The judge listened patiently as their lawyer spoke. Concerns were raised, intentions were framed as care. Then my lawyer stood. He didn't attack, he didn't dramatize. He presented facts, my independence, my evaluations, my clear wishes. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. The room felt very quiet. "I am not confused," I said. "I am not lost. I am not a danger to myself." I paused. "I am simply no longer agreeable." The judge looked at me for a long moment. Then she spoke. "This court does not remove autonomy because adult children feel uncomfortable," she said. The request was denied, just like that. Susan's face went pale. Daniel stared at the floor. I sat back down, my heart finally catching up to what had just happened. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Susan approached me. Her voice cracked. "I was trying to protect you," she said. I looked at her carefully. "No," I replied, "you were trying to protect your future." She turned away. That was the last conversation we had for a long time. In the weeks that followed, something settled. The noise faded, the pressure dissolved, not because things were repaired, because they were revealed. I made changes after that, not out of anger, out of clarity. I revised my will again, adjusted beneficiaries, set firm boundaries that could not be crossed quietly. I also did something unexpected. I forgave them, not in words, not in reconciliation, in release. I stopped carrying their disappointment. It was never mine to hold. Life grew smaller in some ways, quieter, but it grew deeper too. I filled my days with things that belonged to me. Morning walks, books read slowly, conversations that didn't require defense. One evening, months later, I received a message from Daniel. "I hope you're well." I replied with the truth. "I am." And for the first time, I knew it without doubt.